Hello, and welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, where we place emotion at the heart of the workplace, looking at the people, the processes, and the place of work. Now, today, we are looking at the people side of the work that we do. And our guest today has been a long time coming. I think I've been told off at least 3 times for not having our guest on the podcast or before now. So I am making up for that today. Our guest is a positive psychology practitioner, an expert in learning and organizational development, a huge part of the learning and organizational development network, with a huge following on various different social media channels, and also has the most amazing bed hair you could ever ask for. So welcome to the Emotion at Work podcast, Sukhvinder Pabial. Hi, Sukh.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that you've also bugged me the other way to say, why haven't we got this booked in yet, Sukh? So it's a two-way mutual appreciation.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, that's and I think that's probably accurate, to be fair. Yeah, that's accurate. All right, so we'll begin as we always do on the Emotional Work podcast with our unexpected yet innocuous question. So my unexpected yet innocuous question for you, sir, is sunrise or sunset?
I mean, if you follow my Instagram, you'll know it's both. I love a good sunrise and I love a good sunset. And fortunate that where we live over in Epping, that we get good views of both at either end of the house. So I quite enjoy. I think I probably enjoy a good sunrise because it helps me just to feel good about what the day could be.
Mm-hmm.
And then I enjoy a good sunset when the colors of the night sky just become vibrant in a different way.
Yeah,
and you get those hues of the orange and the purples and the reds, and that can be just quite romantic in some ways as well, actually. But both. What about you?
Both, but sunrise.
Both. Well, yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I would go sunset, I think. Probably because I see more of them, maybe. So that might be why I would go. I probably see more sunsets than I do sunrise. So we've got like a north-facing garden, and so I guess especially in the summer, we get to see some amazing sunsets.
Right.
But we wouldn't see the sunrise because there's like houses that side of the garden. Whereas if where the sun would set, you can just kind of see up into the sky, which would be lovely. So, I think I would go. I think I would go sunset, and I do enjoy like so I'm going to say a drink in the sunset, which sounds like I'm describing an alcoholic drink, which I'm not necessarily. I just like that kind of, and I mean, I do drink alcohol in the sunset, but also I think it's that end of day, just kind of sitting down and going, and just breathing a little with a drink of some sort, which could be a peppermint tea, or it could be a beer, or it could be a gin. But yeah, I think that. Whereas I think sunset has more. Maybe it's just a me thing, but sunrise tends to be more active. Like it's a get going rather than sunset is a kind of easing off, maybe. So
yeah. Nice. I like it.
Okay. Yeah. And so what I liked about your description of what you like about the sunrise then is it kind of gives you hope. Gives you hope for the day and gets you thinking about what the day could bring, what the day could mean. And so that probably takes us nicely into your experience with positive psychology, which I know is something that you hold very dear. So I thought, could we begin with where did your experience of positive psychology begin?
Yeah, for sure. So I didn't really hear about it until probably, we're talking quite a while back now. I think 2008 is when I think I'd first heard about it. May even be 2007, when a professor at the time, Professor Martin Seligman, had started to become quite well known for his work in this space, and he
Hmm.
visited London to give a lecture on the topic. So
Oh, okay.
I went along to it, and I was completely enraptured by the topic, how he was articulating what this kind of fledgling field of psychology was looking to try and do.
Hmm.
And yeah, it really sparked something where I was like, oh, this feels and sounds like something I can get behind, and not just because it's about making people feel good, but it's looking into the science of what do we know works for resilience.
Hmm. And you often make a distinction between sort of positive thinking and
Yeah.
positive psychology. So what would that distinction be for you?
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction where um, for the layperson, if they don't really understand what positive psychology is about, they would quite understandably just assume, oh, you just mean positive thinking.
Hmm.
And that's and the only association there is that they share the word positive before them, right? As the preface
Hmm.
before the main word that comes next. And so I think the more I've done kind of my own thinking, and the more I've read around what does the research and evidence tell us about positive thinking and what it can do for us. Positive thinking can be useful in, I think, um, I think there's a few factors where it can be useful, right? One is if it's an immediate thing that you need to kind of reframe in your head in some way.
Hmm.
Yeah, so something, like, I don't know, you've you've become delayed getting into work, right? Either it's in the car or on the train or something. You're like, okay, well, maybe I can rethink that to say, well, maybe I've got more time to read or to listen to a podcast
Hmm.
or listen to my favorite music or something.
Hmm.
I think if the thing that you're facing is not particularly distressing or has any kind of deeper impact on you, and it's something which you can reframe in your mind as well, I think that's also when positive thinking can be helpful, right? So
Hmm.
for example, if at work you've been asked to work on a project and you've never done it before, it can be helpful to think, oh well, that's a great opportunity for me to learn a new skill.
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to be any more profound in its thinking than that, right? And
Yeah.
it's quite achievable in what you could do with that. um and I think it can also be helpful to, I think positive thinking can be helpful when you might be facing like a bit of a trial, and you want to kind of push yourself a bit and motivate yourself a bit.
Hmm.
So maybe maybe you're about to run your first 10K after you've done months of training, and you're at the start
Hmm.
line, and you got those butterflies, and you're like, oh my god, I don't know if I can do this, right? it,
Yeah.
it can be helpful to just kind of go, no, I've done my months of training, I'm ready, I'm prepared, and I'm good for this, I'm ready to go. I think that's where it can be helpful. And then I think that's where it kind of stops in at those different points. I think that's where it has a limitation of what it can
Hmm.
achieve. um and then I think that's where um it, I think that's where a lot of recent research has then started to raise other language around positive thinking, such as toxic positivity,
Hmm.
which I think has been a really interesting development in recent years, which helps us to understand that if you continue to take positive thinking further than its usefulness, then it can start to instill unhelpful thinking and unhelpful behaviors in an individual.
Hmm.
So, for example, um, if you're going through a difficult time with your partner,
Hmm.
and your friends or your family circle try and instill some positivity in those situations, that may just not be the thing that needs to happen, because positivity in that situation may not be the solution that is required in order to be able to mend whatever it needs mending in that situation. Or if you've, the classic example I personally always use is, if you've broken a bone, I can't positively think my way out of it being broken. I can't just suddenly if I've broken my leg, I can't just think, oh, I can get up and walk, I'll be fine. Because as soon as I get up to walk, I will fall over and be in pain and probably do myself more damage. And so I think that's where we need to be careful about how far do we think positive thinking can be useful for us. I think it can be, and I think there are very good examples of where it can be. And then there are other situations where it can often get extended to that I think, oh no, that's just become unhelpful now. And there's research and evidence to support that kind of thinking as well.
Yeah, because I suppose maybe maybe I'm talking about something different, and you can let me know if I am. But I often, I was talking to a member of my team today about that. The narrative I often hear of, it'll be better in a couple of weeks. I've got a really full on, or I've got a really busy, or I've got a really difficult, or whatever, couple of weeks ahead, and then it will be better.
Right.
And I'm not saying it isn't, and there may well be times where it is better in a couple of weeks. There's also occasions where that's more of a fallacy. It's a positive thinking thing. I'm trying to tell myself to think positively, but actually, it's never going to get any better. Was that something? Is that something you'd put in that kind of category, that might be a limitation of it then?
Yeah, I think so. Like I don't, and this is also then where sometimes the language around, or the language we use can sometimes confuse what we're trying to achieve in terms of that kind of mental, that resilience, right? So I think what we can often misplace is that if I want to be resilient if I know I've got a few weeks of real challenge coming up, and I just maintain a level of positivity, I'll get through that. But it's like, oh, but those aren't the same thing. Like, one doesn't equal the other. There may be other things that you have to have in place for those difficult few weeks coming up. Positive thinking might be part of that, but it's not the thing that will enable you to kind of just only get through it.
Okay. And so I'm tempted to ask, what will help then? So positive thinking might be part of it, and of course I could say, get yourself a copy of this bad boy. Get yourself a copy of the Resilience Handbook, because that will help you with those with your resilience in those difficult or challenging or trialing times. But I think one of the things that you and I have discussed off air is the science, and you mentioned it when you did your kind of summary of positive psychology, the science and the evidence that sits behind positive psychology then. So what might be some of those practical ways that you can then sort of build resilience and improve well-being?
So I think this is where I've been really impressed by what kind of studies have been done to help us understand what works for resilience for most people, right? And I think one of the things I've learned as well before we kind of launch into this is to try and help understand, or to try and help frame this in around where is positive psychology a useful frame to be able to bring to everyday situations. So I think starting from the other end can be helpful to kind of distinguish where it's not helpful. So if you're in a abusive, toxic, damaging relationship, positive psychology is not the thing to help you get through that. And it is not a frame of thinking. It is not the psychology of positive psychology cannot help you get through that any better just because you've learned how to build your resilience or improve your well-being. That cannot help that very difficult situation to take place. No, not to take place. It cannot help that to get better, sorry. If you've received some kind of illness diagnosis that is either terminal or life-limiting or life-changing in some way, again, positive psychology is not the philosophy that will help you to live with that condition in any better way. There are other things that can help to do that in very practical ways. So I think those are kind of extreme examples, but they're kind of not as well, because those are very common everyday examples many people face, right?
Yeah.
And so what I think can be helpful here then is to try and ensure that I'm not mis-selling positive psychology to be this panacea for quite difficult life events that might be happening, where it's not that at all. And so I think where it can be helpful then is, how do we think about our everyday resilience, our everyday well-being, in a way where we understand that we can control for probably more things on a day-to-day, longer-term basis than we might normally assume. So, as just kind of a ready example, one of the practices that we know can be very helpful for kind of just general well-being is being active. Right? You don't have to. And being active doesn't mean being an exercise professional or anything like that, right? You don't have to be at the gym every day. You don't have to, do some kind of, or cycling or swimming or running or whatever it is.
Yep.
But just generally being active, not leading a sedentary life, having an active life where you're up and about and you're doing things, generally helps us feel better, because we feel like we're doing something where the body is just pushing and doing and acting in a good and healthy way. And that's just one of those ready examples where we know that if more people would do that, they would generally feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a panacea. It's not the only answer to what other conditions people may be having and living with, but it is a common example of where if you're not out and about, or if you're not getting up and doing things, then you're already limiting what you think might be possible for you, and not really being able to allow yourself that opportunity to feel good about yourself, because you're getting up and you're being active.
Okay, so that helps us with some examples of situations where positive psychology might not be the thing to support you with your resilience, because it's not kind of fit for purpose. Also, there's some the example of being active and not having that sedentary lifestyle is also going to help you then. And I guess I'm just putting myself in the listener's shoes and thinking, all right, well, what might be some practices or some approaches that I could do, I don't know, regularly, whether that regularly be kind of, I don't know, daily, weekly, whatever it might be, that might help and support their resilience and their well-being.
Yeah, nice. And and again, this is where I think I've been impressed with the kind of research in the space to help us understand, well, what kind of practices are good for that, to build that resilience and well-being on an ongoing basis. And I do write about this in the book as well, right? So I think there's several different practices that people can employ, enjoy, and do in different ways, right? So one of those is, how do we reflect on each day by thinking back and trying to understand what were the good things that happened that day to us. There's a particular practice around that. It's called 3 Good Things, and it's become quite a well-known practice to support kind of just how do we just improve how I feel about general things that are happening every day. And whether you do that at the end of the day, whether you do that at the outset of the day, in the middle of the day, I don't think that necessarily matters. Does it have to be every day? It doesn't have to be. Can it be just one thing? Can it be more than 3 things? Of course, it can be less and it can be more, depending on how your day is going. Sometimes I'll often, when I've given talks on this, people will ask as well, isn't it also helpful to them balance that with what didn't go well that day? And I always find that an interesting question, because I'm like, do you know what's interesting about that is, actually, let me ask you, Phil. So what would you think about that? So if someone says, yeah, sure, I get the idea of doing three good things, but why would you not also balance that with a what didn't go well today? I'm curious. What would you want to respond with?
So I think I think I'd say, well, if I'm advocating for, in addition to what you might already do, for thinking about three good things, the same could, that challenge of, well, if you're thinking about three good things, you could think about three things that didn't go so well. I would imagine you're probably already thinking about the things that didn't go so well, and what you're probably not doing is thinking about the things that have gone well. So if you want to think about the things that didn't go so well, then okay, that's all right. And yes, you can do that. And I'd encourage you to put some learning around it, maybe in terms of what didn't go well. What do I want to take from that? What was happening at the time? What do I want to do differently in the future to think about how you can use it? But my experience would be that if you ask people what do they think about more often, things that have gone well or things that haven't gone so well, they would report, we think about things that haven't gone so well more often. Okay, well, in which case, then actually what we're trying to do is already instill some balance. So by doing the three good things, we're trying to bring some balance to your reflections on the day rather than just focusing on the things that didn't go so well.
I love that. And I love that for a couple of reasons. One is you've described there quite readily one of the other practices, which is around reflective practice, right? Which is another a very good, very healthy, very useful practice to put in place, which is exactly that around, oh, well, something didn't go well. So then how can you lean into that in a healthy, constructive way beyond, oh, I just feel a bit rubbish because that didn't go so well. Well, we can do more with that actually. And I think this is the other thing around positive psychology is it doesn't dismiss the difficulties that you may be facing on a day-to-day, everyday basis, right? It doesn't say, well, you should only end up thinking about the good things that happen. It also invites you to really work with emotions and or thinking that may be difficult for you. But if I just come back to the other piece just briefly, so I love what you say there as well, right? Is I think the way you described that was really nice. Is we're already trying to bring balance because we typically don't think about what's going well, and that's often my response, right? Is what's interesting about that question and the way it's framed is there seems to be like an undertone, or there's an underlying bit of thinking that goes with that, which is something along the lines of, well, we shouldn't really talk about what's going well because it's not appropriate, or it's not often accepted that we do that. And I think maybe that there may be some kind of British stiff upper lip thing around that as well, right? Is we just don't really talk about what's going well without being able to also talk about, and here's all the things that have gone wrong. Like, well, we don't have to do that second part. It's very possible to just hold on to what's going well, stay in that appreciation, and allow that to just give us good feelings. That's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not selfish. It's not indulgent. It's a way to kind of boost that sense of achievement. I've done something and something good has happened, and that should be very acceptable, without having to do this false sense of, but you have to stay humble. Like, yeah, well, you can still be humble by accepting what's gone well. Like, that's not, you're not automatically becoming arrogant just by saying, today I'm really glad that I got out of the house for an hour. Like, that's a good thing, but that's not something to, like, you wouldn't, if you had pride over that, that'd be an odd thing to have pride over, right?
No, I agree. And what? So recently we did the emotional work team got together recently to do our kind of end of year review and planning into the coming year. And we started the day, I think, at just after 9, and we finished our round of appreciation at 12:30. So
wow.
So we did 3.5 hours of individual and peer appreciation. So the
I love
questions that I set to the team were, I want you to do some thinking in advance of what are you proud of and what you've achieved, achieved this year. And I'd also like you to think about everyone else in the team and what has someone else in the team done that you're proud of, or you think they've achieved or they've succeeded in this year. Thinking it would take 40 minutes, maybe an hour, and then yeah, we ran it for the whole of the morning, and I think at least once, if not twice during the morning, I felt that pull to, oh, should we move on? I was like, well, no, why should we move on? Actually, this is a really great opportunity for everyone in the team to hear what their peers see them succeeding at and achieving and being proud of. And that's equally valid to the what lessons do we need to learn, what can we do differently, and all of those things. And we'd happily spend 3.5 hours unpicking what went wrong, but we wouldn't spend 3.5 hours just focusing on what went well. So I was like, no, come on then, let's just, if we're going to do this, let's do it. We'll do it thoroughly.
I love that.
We'll do it supportively and so on. So yeah, I'm with you completely. That undertone of others don't deserve to just focus on the good things, or it's inappropriate or whatever. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you did that. I love that the team lent into it. I love that it was you created a space where that was acceptable to do that, and that you could have that full conversation about that. And I think that's one of the other things I often find with one of the other practices then that sits around some of this is, how do we do appreciation and allow appreciation to be expressed and allow it to just be held for what it is, without shying away from it, without kind of dismissing it or being self-deprecating around it. And I think much of that is stuff that we're uncomfortable with when we hear, like, when people hear compliments like, oh yeah, but this or that, it is because of it, and they'll brush it off, or they'll try and say, oh, it's because of something else, or it wasn't because of me, I didn't do that, it was a team effort, or it was someone else's involvement that helped me get there. And I think what we don't often allow for ourselves, and how we express appreciation, is just allowing that space to be held, to be able to say it's okay to tell someone that they're doing a great job, and that is all you need to say.
Yeah,
it is okay to tell someone that you love that you really appreciate them for the way that they support you, and that's all you need to say. And it's okay to tell your team member that they did a great job of that report that they pulled together, and that's it. They don't need to have to hear anything else.
Yeah, agree.
But all of those expressions of appreciation often end up coming with a but afterwards, or and here's how you could have done better next time, or here's what I'd love for you to do more of. And in any of those builds, or any of those pieces that come next, it nearly always negates the first thing that was said.
Yeah,
exactly. And then I often end up kind of reflecting on that to go, well, don't say the first thing if you don't want it to be just held as a thing on its own. If you want to tell someone what you'd love them to do more, just tell them what you'd love them to do more.
You'd love them to do more. Yeah. That's why I despise the feedback sandwich. I just think it's the...
it's awful.
Yeah. And so I want to give a quick shout out to Alison Monkhouse. Because when you were describing 3 good things, she came into my mind as the most prolific 3 good thinger I've ever known. I mean, I'm not on X/Twitter anymore. But and I think she came to the same session I came to when you did a positive psychology workship in London.
Maybe
you introduced the idea of 3 good things. And she does it every day. I mean, I say she does. I don't know if she still does, because I'm not on Twitter anymore. But for all of the years I was on Twitter, I know that if I searched hashtag 3 good things and went recent, Alison Monkhouse would be within the last 24 hours, because it was just fantastic. and it always inspired me that she was so diligent and consistent in her reflections. Yeah, it's fabulous.
And there's also something about that where it when we often hear about how people put things like this into practice is that, again, I'm going to just kind of repeat something I've just said a bit not long ago, is that doesn't mean that they're not dealing with difficult things on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
It just means that they're taking that time in that moment, at that moment in that day, to say, whatever else is happening in my day, these are the three good things I want to say, and I want to put down, and I want to commit that to a tweet or my journal or something else. And that's important. That's so what that does is, in the long run, is it gives us a bank of evidence, personal evidence, that helps us to see that, oh, I'm dealing with a lot of things, and or things are going well, and or oh, things are tough, but thank God, I'm grateful to be able to see where things are happening in a good way.
Yeah.
And that's where we get that. Like, I love the way you describe that. Right, this practice gives us the balance of every day brings its own set of challenges, and so this practice just invites us to be able to say, whatever you're dealing with, here's an opportunity to just stay with what is helpful, healthy, positive, whatever the right word is that you want to use. That helps you sit there.
Yeah. So I know, as well as positive psychology, emotional intelligence is also something that's important to you. And within the Resilience Handbook, I guess you've got sort of 4 sections maybe. So you got part 1 on positive psychology, part 2 on emotions and emotional intelligence. And then mindfulness being the third, and then part 4 is where you just kind of bring it all together.
Yeah.
So can we dip into the emotional intelligence bit for a moment? Would that be okay? So, I guess if I think about the listener, then, so the majority of our listeners are people that in the workplace. A lot of people, professionals, I would say. So a lot of HR L&D people listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
So when you think about, and granted, I'm going to do a blatant plug for my own organization and the podcast when I say this, what for you is important around emotional intelligence in the workplace in particular?
Yeah, nice. So I think one of the things that when I was researching resilience, and I was writing about all of the different parts of it that I wanted to pull together, I think what I started to understand for myself is, as I spoke about earlier, there's limitations to what positive psychology can do. And so that's where I think a supportive model, theory, set of thinking around emotional intelligence can help what we're doing to continue to build that resilience. And so, when I think about emotional intelligence, and I have used some of your previous guests and your interviews that you've had to help me understand that better, right? Is, well, what are emotions, and how do we understand a definition of emotions to be able to arrive at some kind of consistent common language around this? And one of the regular things that listeners of the Emotional Work podcast will know is it's quite difficult to do that, and there aren't really many consistent and or common ways to be able to define what emotional intelligence is. And so when I started, because a lot of my work is around corporate learning and development, how do we help people do things better at work? How do we help them to get upskilled and better skilled? A fair bit of that is the technical proficiency of what you can do. And then an important part of how we get better at work is through relationships and through connections and through the way that I show up as a leader or as a manager. And nearly all of that involves having to deal with people. And if we're having to deal with people, then we kind of have to have some understanding of if I'm not someone who's naturally attuned to how people talk, what their mannerisms might be, what their inferences are, what their frames of reference might be, how can I understand that in a way with a set of principles or a set of guidance or set of guides or whatever it is that help me to do that. And I think emotional intelligence is one of those tools. And I my personal preference for it comes from a place of again, I think there is more evidence that sits with emotional intelligence as a practice than with solely having to go for, like, quite traditionally within corporate environments, you might use a psychometric tool of some sort to um, help with things like leadership or team development or personal development. And I think where that can be unhelpful is you need to have qualified individuals to be able to debrief on those and help you to really understand that in a meaningful way. Whereas I think the same could be said of emotional intelligence, that it can be a very misunderstood set of thinking, but actually um, it doesn't, or rather, let me rethink how I want to say that. Those who understand the topic area well can help others to understand how it's a very accessible way of thinking. It's an accessible way of being able to understand what is someone trying to say to me, how am I reading their emotions that they're giving to me, their language they're using, the body language they might be displaying, the different forms of communication that I might be having to communicate myself and or deliver. And I think emotional intelligence is a very useful technique that helps with it within quite a few of those situations.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess one of the things that we certainly find in the research that we do is that people struggle with how to express. I'm not going to call them negative emotions because I don't like the term negative emotions. I think it's unhappy. It's unhappy. Sorry, it's unhelpful even. So when I guess so when we have to. What people report then, I would say, in the research that we do, is that they keep that inside then. So they tend to keep that inside rather than express it. So what might be maybe a suggestion or recommendation or suggestions or recommendations for how might you express those difficult or those destructive emotions maybe?
And I think this is one of the things that I think work from the likes of Brené Brown and Dr. Susan David, I think it is. What they've been able to show is it's okay to have difficult emotions. It's okay to feel like I am angry. It is okay to feel like I am frustrated or annoyed or stuck or unsure. Like, any of that is fine. It's how we understand that for ourselves, partly.
Yes.
So there is a fair bit, I think, around that, self-reflection, that self-awareness of, I'm clearly being affected by something. How do I understand what that is for me? So I think that's one step. That's an important step. And I think, my experience, and I think yours might be as well, is that when people don't do that, they just express things which may not be what they're wanting to actually say. So they may be frustrated. It might come across as passive aggression, or it might come across as misdirected, or being angry about something which isn't the real issue. And it's those are common things that can happen. And I think what can happen is sometimes we haven't taken the time to understand in ourselves what's going on for me, and therefore how do I express that? How do I let someone know what's going on for me? And then I think building on that as well, then within the workplace, and how do we get people to express that in a better way, in a more healthy way, is that how do we help each other to understand, and as line managers in particular, how do we help line managers to understand if your team member is going through something, you don't have to fix them.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
That's not what they're after. Right? It's not a, hey boss, I'm feeling particularly stressed today, and then you as the manager, like, trying to resolve their situation for them. That's not
Yep.
necessarily what they need, and it's trying to read into, well, what's going on in this moment. Is it an emotional reaction you're having? Is it
Mm-hmm.
a skills challenge that you've got? Is it a relationship issue you've got with someone else in the team? Like, and any of that can mean that you're expressing yourself in different ways. So how do we allow those expressions to come out? And then also, just because I've had the conversation today doesn't mean that that's the only time I need that conversation to take place. Like, I may need to have 2 or 3 conversations where I keep coming back to something we've spoken about, which may be emotionally charged, might be emotionally difficult, but that's okay as well, because we're all trying to process things in our own way, and not everyone may be either quick to thinking or quick to resolution or quick to answers or quick to action. Some of us, and I've certainly had this within my team, is, I have team members who often need to just keep coming back to something, and I'm like, that's cool. Right? That's why I'm here. I'm your manager, right? I'm trying to help you to get to the best version of yourself at this moment. If that means that you need to sit with a difficult thing, and I need to sit in that difficult thing with you, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not going to try and fix this. I'm not going to try and give you an answer that tells you that, yes, this is going to get better. That's not what I need to know, and that's not what you need to do. So how do we create the environment where that can happen in a good, healthy way?
Yeah, definitely. And I know one of the researchers that you talk about in the emotions and the emotional intelligence section is Dr. Paul Ekman, and his, or is he professor? I think he's professor emeritus, but either way, and within his book Emotions Revealed, he talks about facial expressions, but he also describes what he kind of coins a term of universal triggers of emotions. So, for example, anger being to do with obstruction to a goal, disgust being something we find offensive, fear being a threat of harm, all of which can be kind of physical things or psychological things. So it could be a physical obstruction to a goal, to anger. There's literally a door that you want to go through that's in your way. It could be a metaphorical or a psychological barrier. You want to get somewhere, but there's somebody else's actions or something that's happening that's getting in the way. And one of the things that I try and avoid doing is asking people, why are you angry, or why are you offended, or why are you disgusted, or why are you whatever. Partly because I don't like why questions, but also because, so what I do instead is I use those universal triggers to kind of explore it. So it might be, it looks like this is something that's important to you. So and what's getting in the way, and where is it you want to get to? Because that helps then. And if somebody says, well, there's nothing in the way, okay, well then in my head I go, well, so it's not anger then. All right, great. So let's move on to another one. Right. Let's pick something else. So has somebody crossed a line? Has a line been crossed for you? Yes, this line's been crossed. Oh, okay, so this might be disgust then. All right, fair enough. Then, or this could be contempt, because that's got an element of morality to it as well. Or, what are the risks here? What are the threats that you perceive? Oh, I can see this and that and the other. Okay, so there could be some fear that's in here then. So you can use the language of the trigger, I think, to help an individual explore what they're feeling. Absolutely agree with what you said, that without the intent to fix it. So this isn't about trying to fix it for them. What I'm doing as the manager or the leader or the coach in this example, or the colleague or the friend, is to use use that language from the universal triggers of emotions to then help that individual figure out. And it's not necessarily about them or anyone having an accurate label for the emotion. It's just helping somebody
No.
find a label to put on the emotion, and that is the bit that helps to be able to say, yes, it's this, it's that, it's the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's great, right? And I love that. Because one of the other things I talk about in the book as well is how through the practice of emotional intelligence and improving our self-awareness, part of that self-awareness is understanding more about our triggers, actually. And because one of the things that you've helpfully shared in this podcast is emotions don't just happen on their own. Like, I can't just will myself to be angry in this moment at this time right now. I would have to, if I wanted to do that, I would have to think about something that has made me particularly angry, and then I would have to really manifest that to get into. And that's quite a difficult thing to do. That's a lot of cognition that has to happen, right? That's a lot of thinking power you have to put into that in order to drum that up, that feeling up. Whereas if you are feeling angry and you have anger, then it can be helpful at some appropriate moment to just take a moment and go, whoa, hold on, what is happening there? Why have I got to this? Why am I so angry? What is it that suddenly triggered that? And that's I think that can be really helpful language to help us understand that this isn't about doing like personal counseling or personal therapy or anything like that, but this is just improving our own self-awareness, right? This is just about how do I understand what is affecting my well-being today? Something's affected it right now in this moment. What is that? And it may not, the answer may not come today. And I love that's where your questions can come in helpful. Having someone else ask us the questions. I know you've spoken about the thinking environment type approach before, and I know the question's going to come later. What is it? Is there anything else that you'd like to think, feel, or want to say? And anytime I've been in those conversations, either with you or with other friends of ours who ask that kind of similar question, I always appreciate the question because I don't know where it's going to take me. I don't know what else I do want to think, feel, or want to say, but it's such an invitational question that helps me to get there that I didn't know I needed. So to have that other person help me just kind of walk me through that can often help my own thinking process.
That's wonderful to hear. That's good to hear. All right. So the third component of the book then is around mindfulness. And so what made you want to bring mindfulness in? Because I feel like mindfulness seems to have gone through this kind of, I don't know, like maybe it's the classic adoption curve where nobody really knew about it, then everybody was talking about it, then it got kind of slated for a bit, and so I guess what is it about mindfulness that's important for you?
And I mean, I agree, right? It has gone through a real kind of that peak and then sudden dip, right? I think for me, and this is where I try to tie them together in the book, is positive psychology helps us to understand what can I do for my long-term resilience. So that's pretty clear. I understand what that could be. Emotional intelligence helps us to understand how can I improve my self-awareness and the relationships that I have with others. Like, cool. Okay, that also helps me to give me a good frame around that, and I can see how the two interplay with one another. And then with mindfulness, I think the reason I wanted to include that is it gives us a way to appreciate what's happening in the present moment, which again we just don't often do. We're often too distracted by, I've got this big goal to achieve, and if I don't get there, then I haven't achieved. I'm not going to be successful. Whatever success looks like, however we define that level of success, or commonly on social media, people will say, you just got to put your phone away. Like, but it's not just about putting your phone away. It's how do we how do we take that moment that I'm in right now and just appreciate what's happening now? And I'm
Yeah.
okay with that. How you and I were both at a conference where the speaker, Alan Wallace, spoke about how people would rather play a, a game of solitaire, which for those who may not know, is a card game you play by yourself.
Hmm.
And they would rather play a game of solitaire than sit there by themselves in their own thinking and with their own feelings and emotions. Because that's what we're told. We're told that it is too uncomfortable to sit with your own
Mm.
set of thinking and feelings and emotions, and that you're probably better distracted by doing something else. And I think that's always stuck with me. 'Cause I'm like, oh, that is such an insightful piece of insight that 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 helps us to understand just how uh, uninformed we are about
Mm.
it's okay to sit with your own thinking. It's okay to be in this moment and be bored. That's okay. Like,
Yeah.
if that's what you're feeling, that's what you're feeling. There's nothing wrong with that. It's
Mm.
okay to be able to sit in a moment with your kids and feel like you want to take a photo of that moment and video it for capturing it as a memory. That doesn't stop you from being present.
Mm.
It's it's when we it's when we do distracting activities as a coping mechanism for not dealing with today's problems. And I think
Yeah.
that's what mindfulness can help us with, right? It's a way to be able to help us take that time personally and go, right, there's something happening for me.
Mm.
And I shouldn't shy away from it, because if I do, it's only going to come back and resurface in a different way tomorrow or tonight. Like,
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to sleep well tonight because I'm not dealing with it, or I'm probably going to drink too much alcohol because I haven't dealt with it, or I'm going to
Mm.
overeat, or I'm going to undereat, or I'm going to do something else that could be harmful or unhealthy, and
Mm.
because I'm just not dealing with the situation.
Yeah.
And again, careful. Mindfulness isn't an answer to deep, difficult problems. Like, if again, I'm going to use the same example I used earlier. If you're in a toxic, abusive relationship, mindfulness ain't going to help with that. Like, you
Mm.
can't just take yourself off into this Zen state where suddenly, like, things are all better and rosy.
Hmm.
What it can do, though, is help you reflect on, this is a very difficult situation I'm facing. I need to do something about this. I cannot stay in this situation. For
Mm.
me, that is mindfulness in action, right? Because it is allowing us to be able to understand and articulate and express what I'm thinking and feeling in this moment, be that difficult or be that beauty or be that love or happiness or sadness or anger. Like, I think this is where mindfulness allows us to sit with what's happening in this moment today, and that's okay.
Mm. And I really like that, the way that you've hung the three parts of the book together. Then, in terms of the mindfulness is what can help us in the here and now, helping us
Yeah,
noticing what's happening in the here and now, and not being, not taking ourselves off somewhere else, or pretending it isn't happening, or whatever else that may be. It's about saying, right, this is what's happening right now, and being able to, and being confident and equipped to sit with that. You then have emotions and emotional intelligence, then, which are there to help us with ourselves and the relationships that we have around us. And then positive psychology, which are practices that can help us overall in a maybe a medium to long term way. So you got the kind of
yeah,
moment to moment stuff with mindfulness. You've got the moment to short term things that you can do with with improved or increased emotional intelligence, and then how do you maintain an overall level of resilience through positive psychology practices. So I really like that, the way you've hung those different elements together.
thank you. Yeah, and and others who have written books will attest to this. To find that thread that you want to hang a book on it takes a fair bit of work, right?
Mm.
And it did take. I think it took me a fair bit of time to know what was it that I wanted to hang it on, and those three things seem to fit well together for me. But I'm sure there are other things as well that, when I've spoken to other people about the general topic of resilience, some things I purposefully didn't include were things like, philosophy, right? There is a lot.
Yeah.
There are a lot of philosophers who have written about resilience. That is very deep thinking. I didn't even go there. Like, I left it alone completely.
Yeah.
There's stuff around things like economics. How is it? What kind of economic policy can help people be resilient and improve their well-being through government interventions and what have you. Like, I'm not going there either. Like, I'm just not touching any of that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, I had to be quite clear and careful about what was it I wanted to make available and accessible through the book. So yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Welcome. All right. So we'll move into the final stage of the podcast in a second, then, with our second unexpected and innocuous question, which we'll do shortly. Before we do that, though, so emotion at work, we're a bit unique in that we use emotions as the lens to analyze behavior, performance, communication, and relationships in the workplace. And then what we do with that analysis is we apply it through bespoke coaching, facilitation, team development methods that drive real change. And then we help people and organizations to put that theory into action, and we place emotion where it belongs, at the center of where they operate. So if you or your team or your organization want a unique and pragmatic approach to the role that emotions play in your workplace, then get in touch on hello@emotionatwork.co.uk. And for now, back to the show. All right then, Sukh. So our second unexpected yet innocuous question is, what has surprised you in the process of writing your book?
What surprised me? A few different things. One was it took me years, literally years, to write this book, and
Okay.
I think what I hadn't appreciated properly was, even though I used to write a blog and I used to be quite prolific with it, it's a very different writing style to writing a book. And it wasn't until I'd got an editor involved to help me do a professional review of the book and the writing that I was able to really appreciate, oh, right, there's a lot here to reword and to do some rework on. And so I did. But then that took me another year and a half before I got to a stage where I was ready to kind of give it back to the editor and say, right, here's my second draft now.
Okay.
So that was one thing that surprised me. The other thing is that to promote a book is hard work, and I have not spent nearly enough time trying to do that. And without doing that, it is hard for a book to become known and for others to kind of pick it up and want to read it. So there is a fair bit of that. Even if you have backing from a publisher, and I went down the self-publishing route. There's no guarantee that just because a publisher is there that it's going to do well on the bookshelves either, because it may not actually hit the bookshelves.
Okay. Well, what we will do is we'll put a link to the Resilience Handbook and where people can buy it into the show notes. We'll also put some links into the different people that we've discussed today. So we'll put some links into Martin Seligman. We'll put some links into Paul Ekman. We'll put some links into Susan David. Have we talked about anybody else? I don't think we talked about anybody else.
Brené
I think they're the three. Oh, Brené Brown. Thank you. Yes. So we'll put some links into those individuals. And to bring the podcast to a close then, our fully expected question, based on what you said earlier on, is there something else then? Something more that you are thinking, feeling, or would like to say?
No, there isn't. Just thanks for finally having me on after much conversation about are we to do this or not. Um, but no, it's been great to be able to talk about it, and I appreciate being on. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for speaking about it. All right, and that's it from this episode of the Emotion at Work podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.